Hello, welcome to Being Reintegrated. So here we are. My name is Tim Wright. Thank you. I have recently read this book by Nicole Lefebvre. Um, as y'all know, I don't know how to say French names, but I do have the materials. I don't know how to say it. So Nicole Jacques Lefebvre, Lefevre, and it's her Dervy book on Louis Claude de Saint Martin. In that book, she starts to talk about some beautiful stuff. One, she gives the quote from Saint Martin about the marriage of Martinus de Pasquale, his 20-year-old teacher, and also Jacob Boehme, who he encountered in his 50s. Now, this came from the letters of Kirchberg, so I was really happy to see that because I've always heard that quote from Rene Cozy, but I never knew its source. I just didn't know it. So I got that, and then I saw that the book called "The Spirit des Choses," basically it's the spirit of things in English, had never been translated to French or to English. So I translated it from French into English using GPT stuff, and I have an English French speaking editor. And we're also going to go through the English translation on Being Reintegrated from now on. Go pick up the book because this is what we're talking about. Today we're going to read pages 1 through 5, which is the volume 1, which is the idea of the plan of this work. So I'll stop periodically to give commentary on what I think is interesting, but it's not going to be a systematic approach. It's just going to be a merger between Jacob Boehme stuff, which he's going to tell us about, and also Martinez, which I'm kind of fluent in, but you know, these writings are so good because they give us a nuance that is not really at first apparent. Idea of the plan of this work. Man wants to give a reason for everything he does and find one for everything he sees. From this, I presume that there must be a reason for everything that exists, and that the eye of man is like a sovereign judge established to universally discern the reason of things and uphold it everywhere in the enjoyment of its rights. From this point, I believed I should take this very man as my perspective in order to attempt to acquire sound notions on the existence, purpose, and properties of all the objects I would approach with this useful instrument. Real quickly, what interested me in this book in the first place was the fact that this is Jacob Boehme speaking to us through Saint Martin. So they say that Jacob Boehme was translated better in the French than he was in the German. I said this in the introduction, but we're just having a conversation about it on Being Reintegrated. Thanks for your support. Jacob Boehme was understood better by Saint Martin in French than he was in German, which Saint Martin learned in his 50s. But what's interesting about this is he uses the term sovereign judge, and if you know, you know, but also says that the eye of man is the sovereign judge. So this is putting us immediately into the three circles of man doctrine. But what was interesting and what I was getting at is that this is actually an initiatory statement. And the reason why is because what's happening is he's sharing with us, at that time, Rene Descartes was really taking over in the Enlightenment period and the rationalism of scientific rationalism. But what happened is as we moved more toward the categorization of all knowledge and away from the experience of the things known, which he talks about, we got more into a cognitive trap of what was called the res cogitans. And it was very interesting to find this because Saint Martin is advocating for what's called the res extensa, or the experience base of all philosophy. Amazing that this book came to me after understanding that what the Carmelite monks actually went through was a thing called it was a scala contemplationis, and it was in order to make themselves into monastic figures of this kind of illumination and unification process. But what was interesting about it was learning that they have a thing called non-discursive gnosis, just like I would say in the Vajrayana tradition of the Karmapa and the Kagu. I know the words, but I may not be saying it right. Kagyu lineage, where they talk about what's called the Dharmakaya and the body of truth. And Mahamudra, which is a seal that's put on someone who understands the body of truth. Mahamudra is a way of saying non-discursive gnosis has been indicated and has been analyzed in this person's core view of philosophy. It's pretty amazing stuff. So anyway, what Saint Martin is telling us is that this res extensa is basically what he's going to focus on through the whole volume, which I got to tell you, in volume 1 and 2, it's 700 pages plus in French, and we got it down to about 400 pages, 450 pages. The first volume, which you can buy on Amazon, I'll try to stop plugging all my books, but I'm working pretty hard at making all this stuff available. The first volume is 217 pages of the translation, with a few pages of table of contents and introduction. So it is well put together. I learned how to actually make books to do this, so I'm very excited to be able to read this to you. It is my work now because it is a poetical and nuanced translation. So it is very unique to Kim Publishing, which is what I'm running as a publication arm, to produce all of this esoteric literature. And we're back to the reading now. Indeed, I said to myself, it must not be in vain that the spirit of man desires and seeks everywhere, as it does, a point of support upon which all the faculties that constitute him rest in peace. He needs to discover a vast and luminous axiom that will free him from the torments of his universal uncertainty. He requires a total clarity that nothing can veil or extinguish, one that will serve thought as an immovable center, powerful enough to act as a general pivot for the whole economy of things, and fertile enough to vivify and harmonize the great family that makes up the circle of beings. In the final analysis, this means that he longs for the truth, and for the truth in its entirety. I mean, Saint Martin is poetical and beautiful, but there's some parts here where he talks about the circle of beings. This was talked about by Martinez as the reintegration of beings will show you that there are minor, superior, major, and inferior beings. That's what I think he's talking about here. So in that analysis, this is where he's talking about Martinez stuff, but he's moving it over into this sense supportive philosophy that he's learning with Jakob Boehme and going through in the French Enlightenment. It is this desire which, when brought closer to my perspective, became an important witness for me and seemed of the utmost weight. For according to a very common but instructive adage, we do not desire something that we have no knowledge of. Thus, this desire alone proves that man has glimpsed the truth within him, and that he senses it, however troubled he may be in trying to make sense of it. Now, if you picked up a little bit of existentialism here, existentialist philosophy, then you nailed it. Basically, what he's saying is that man cannot be in bondage without knowing freedom. And so you can't have a desire of something without having the truth of the thing which is causing you to have the desire, is what I think he's saying. One cannot sense something without there being some underlying base that serves as the element for our sensations. However confused and distorted they may be, as in dreams and delirium, or as when I hold a ball of wax between two crossed fingers. I didn't really get that. So, there's parts of it where it's still a little cryptic, and the translation does have a little bit of a nuance to it that only a native French speaker who's familiar with the idioms and phrases would be able to make it sound better. But for all of its faults, it's really amazing to have this opportunity to read this information. And the knowledge, however shapeless that we have of it, are one of the demonstrations of its existence. We also find here a strong presumption that our spirit is of a real nature and capable of participating in this imperishable light, for there are only desires between analogous beings. Thus, we would not desire the truth if we were not of its kind. Finally, we find a new proof of the existence of this truth, as well as of our analogy with it, and an indisputable fact that teaches us that human thought can only live on admiration, and that man alone is susceptible to it among all other beings in nature. For if we have a perpetual need to admire, there must perpetually be something above us that can satisfy this unquenchable appetite in us. And reciprocally, this inexhaustible and eternal source of admiration could never produce any feeling in us if it did not find in our being the natural and necessary affinity to perform such a sublime and delightful combination. Thus, we can say that if we were only matter, as crude philosophy so often loves to teach, it would result in two effects that contradict everything observation shows us. The first would be that this need for admiration that we feel would never be felt among beings, for even animals, which share almost all other affections, show only astonishment or nothing when the circle of their limited relation is expanded or varied, and when they are approached by these torrents of admiration that fill us. We also see that they enjoy the benefits of nature darkly, which we have the power and the pleasure of analyzing while enjoying them as they do. We see finally that in the face of the imposing phenomena of this nature, they flee. They are astonished, while we judge, we calculate, we admire. So I find this language so amazing just to read, to find that, that our very nature is this worship, this adoration, this admiration. I just find that so uplifting and hopeful. The second effect would be that this radical source, or this necessary principle of admiration which exists above us, would not find a place of rest where it could deposit the treasures it is full of, and which it cannot help but try to spread. For we clearly see that this principle crosses all of the substances of nature without them being able to notice it or admire it, just as we see that it crosses all our bodily substances to reach us without them noticing it or admiring it, because neither one nor the other can seize it, embrace it, and fix it by binding themselves to it, whereas it finds this resting place in the human mind and in the human soul. And because all the above proofs combine to convince us that this human soul has a foundation capable of retaining it, feeling it, and sympathizing with it. Only then can the plan be fulfilled. For if it is true that there can be no ideas of truth in us without an analogy to it, it must also be true that as soon as there is analogy, there can also be alliance. I find that so amazing. Anyway, continuing. Without which the filling of this analogy would be nothing but suffering and torment. From this we can draw the universal formula. In the true order of things, knowledge and enjoyment of the known object must go hand in hand. Whew! So you see, Saint Martin is just laying it down, and they were much more educated in those days than we are now. But we have video. You can listen to this. Thanks for subscribing again. It's so amazing that he talks about that analogy itself. Our admiration is an analogous relationship to the thing which is admired. So, and that thing which is admired is truth. It makes me feel so happy to have this translation, because in the Gnostic philosophy of the Corpus Hermeticum, it talks about gnosis being the things which are. Often, taonta, which is the Greek word for gnosis, is the things which are. And Saint Martin is saying that which is reflected in our desire. So I didn't get this when I read 10 Instructions. He talks about desire, he goes on and on and on about desire, but he doesn't really go this level of depth and clarification that I'm seeing in the 10 Instructions to the Men of Desire. So this augments that so well. Anyway, I'm really happy to have that. Let's see here. Now, as we see that this formula is generally valid in all classes of nature, each according to their particular laws, except in man, since he does not possess the truth he seeks, desires, and senses, we do not fear straying in asserting that man is not here in his proper measure. Whatever the reason for this painful irregularity, he demonstrates, he proves to himself, as well as to his fellow men, at all moments of his existence. If analogy requires alliance, and the lack of alliance is a state of suffering, or outside of measure, it follows that the supreme truth must, by its nature, tend continually to bring an end to this misalignment or lack of measure in which man finds himself, as for the very interest of this truth, it is good that this great object is accomplished, since if there is happiness for the one who admires, there are surely glorious delights for the one who is the source of this admiration. I love it. I love it. Analogy requires alliance. And if alliance is a state of suffering or outside of measure, it follows that supreme truth must be by its nature tend continually to bring an end to this misalignment. It's so indicative of true philosophy, what he's saying right now. And not just because I translated it and I want you to go buy the book. I mean, we have never had this before in English. So I am really reveling in the fact that I have this material to talk about with you. And we will talk about it. No violation of copyright. I have the book and I printed it out all in front of me, so we'll just read right through it. So that is a benefit of subscription. You're already getting 50% off and a commentary on a book. It's only $20. It's not like the Cohen Instructions that I made, which does talk about admiration. In the Cohen Instructions, Saint Martin I made it to where Saint Martin talks about the in the treatise of admiration, further information about this stuff. So it is very amazing that we have such a complete amount of stuff now. And this also contains the treatise on forms, which I personally got a lot of, when I was editing, I got a lot of feelings that this is actually a more expanded version of the Treatise of Forms, which is manuscript 4121, and it is also in Cohen Instructions. But this is called Fragments of the Treatise of Admiration, and it was done posthumously, but I put it in this book because a lot of these points that he's saying and the spirit of things is in this few pages of the Treatise of Admiration. Although it's only a few pages, I think it would be very beneficial to augment with this any work that you're doing in the Order des Cohens Ressuscités along with these teachings. Because recently I had a friend who's a pretty high grade member of other esoteric organizations, and he said, you have to teach us this stuff. It's not fair, to non-savants, which I felt was a compliment, that we're not going to be able to have the understanding of all of this. And so it takes too much time, energy, and effort to be able to understand all this. Well, that's why I'm doing this. I'm reading through, and we're having a nice little conversation about contextualization of this information, so you can see just how important it is to the current. I'm not of the Anne Boleyn version of Martinism, where you go and get a bunch of certificates and you say that you're connected to a bunch of things without any teaching. The person that instructed me in this stuff said pretty much that it's teaching that will be the glue that holds together these orders, not just the certifications and stamps, So we're in an area where I'm very, very happy to get the core doctrinal marriage between Jakob Boehme and Martinez. Anyway, continuing. Moreover, we see this magnificent alliance can only form between beings who have the power of their action, so that their rapprochement being voluntary, they can mutually offer valid proofs of their affection. Or in other words, we see that this magnificent alliance can only form between free beings. Thus, among all the beings who make up the universe, not finding any after man who is free and who experiences admiration, we must conclude that it is not in them either that truth primarily seeks to wrest its glory, nor in them that it has placed its delights of the highest order, as we shall see later. Finally, this continual tendency of truth to straighten the misaligned paths of man being supported by the natural and irrevocable principles that we have just been presented, or that have just been presented, we will risk nothing too great by saying that everything that exists for us, around us, outside of us, by us, or without us, finally, everything that can be the subject of our observations and discoveries is but a collection of objects of instruction offered to our study so that we can see what this alliance consists of, to which our analogy entitles us to claim, and the way we must follow to achieve it. And from what is thus given to us as a lesson to study, we can once again conclude indisputably that we are free, since no such task is offered to beings who are not the masters of accepting it or rejecting it, or taking it or leaving it as they wish. Just as the laws of animals, which one may, if one wishes, regard as lessons, nature does not give them to study their will. It executes and operates them herself in them, for them, and despite them. Whew! I mean, it's the truth is just in the writing itself. I can't really add anything to that. I would just say meditate on that, because there is so much profundity in Saint Martin's writings. Mythologies and traditional books from all countries and peoples, having all these sublime truths as their basis, however distorted they may appear there, will also show themselves in turn but as simple witnesses testifying to facts already attested, and not with authority, nor as radical proofs of these same truths, proved without books and by the mere inspection of man, a precaution that the fanatical teachers of various doctrines did not have, who only knew how to rely on traditions and books, and who by this have misled or deceived men. Whereas by using traditions and books only as subsidiary means, they could have surely promised more success. Thus, nature, the elements, the arts, the sciences, man, thought, languages, civil and political associations, sacred or profane traditions, everything in the end will present itself to us from a perspective that deserves all our attention. By the way, this entire 2-volume book set is about just those things. No man, beloved and sacred object to my heart, I will not fear to have misled you by painting you in the most comforting colors possible, the riches, the supports, and the testimonies that crowd around you, to attest at once to your destination and the resources offered to you to fulfill it. Look at yourself then in the midst of these pure and luminous thoughts, which often shine upon your mind or your intelligent faculty, in the midst of these secret and interior insinuations that so often stimulate your soul or your loving faculty. In the midst of all the facts and all the visible or intellectual tableau that surround you, in the midst of all of the marvelous phenomena or physical nature, in the midst of all of these traditional annals of the intimate history of your being, in the midst of your own works, and in the productions of your genius, look at yourself, I say, in the midst of all of these beacons, like in the midst of so many rallying points, all tending to bring you closer to the immutable truth that you cannot do without. Think with respectful joy that all these rallying points aim to open your organs and faculties to the sources of this admiration you need, and that the one who admires without ceasing will be led straight to the immensity of the perfect and eternal whole, which is the object of his universal longing. If that's not the aurora, if that's not, the sun shining out, if that's not the feeling of hopefulness, I don't know what is. I mean, those words in and of themselves in this dark time, for me, really, really bring hope. That fundamental to my basis of existence is this longing for admiration, and I cannot admire or long or desire anything without truth as an object being there. Jung said the same thing when he was talking in the Red Book about his experiences in 1913, I think. He was talking about that if you only have the world, you only have one half of the thing which you need in order to feel like you possess the world. The other is called the image. And I would venture to say that Saint Martin has just shown us what the components of the image are. It's very amazing. So, yeah, I use the word image on purpose. It says we are made in the image of God. Well, when we feel this desire, according to Louis Claude de Saint Martin, when we feel this desire, we're in touch with our image. Now, it may be distorted, it may be directed toward the wrong area, but by following the desire itself, we will eventually be directed toward the correct areas, what this is saying. Because it's rooted in the immensity, is what he says, of perfect and eternal whole. Well, that in Martinez, for those who know, Martinezism is the divine immensity, where the monad comes from. So he is taking this completely into the scientific taxonomy that we learn in the Elukoan and that he learned in his 20s. That is for sure framing his philosophy as he explains it to us. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll make this one free just so you can see what the book is about. I want to make these paid commentaries, but I might just because of that, if you have the desire to do this, I might just make it free. I don't know. Support the Patreon though, so I can keep making them free. Otherwise, I'm only going to be able to give these to people who are subscribing. Along with the Cohen Codex, which is a translation of all of the catechisms and source texts, including the brand new Red Book from Solesme and Lyon's manuscripts that we've released on Amazon. All of this material is coming to a crescendo because we don't need corporate backing anymore. With Kim Publications, we are able to now start and build the esoteric oeuvre of literature that we need. So thanks for coming here, your central source of Saint Martin and Martinist education. My name's Tim Wright, and thanks again for all of your help and support.